Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. I know a lot of formalities have been done already, but let me once again also welcome all of you again to the 6th African Actuarial Congress happening here in Accra, Ghana. As you're very much aware, this is a 3-day program spanning today till Friday. But this session is a very academic one. It's a very academic one with focus on actuarial teachers. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking into academic topics surrounding the profession. At this point in time, with your kind permission, please let me invite to give the chairman's remark, the ASG president, Mr. Neil Tego. So Mr. Neil Tego, if you're here, please, you have the podium. Thank you.
Good morning once again. I think I spoke earlier with the other session, and this is the Actuarial Teachers Conference, the first of its kind. And I'm privileged to be the first host to this conference. We are grateful to have you all here. In fact, I've had the first gift from Caribbean. Chocolate. So before you leave, please get Ghana chocolate. Good. Distinguished ladies, delegates, and ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. This is the 6th African Congress of the IAA, which is International Actuarial Association. We are honored and delighted to host some of today's experts, lecturers, and students. Without you, this event would not have been possible. Thank you very much for helping to make this event a reality. We have the president of the IAA with us here, so privileged. And you are welcome, President, with us. And then delegates from SOA, they are here with us. IFOA, just show by hand. Okay. CAS, Casualty. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And then South Africa Association. Thank you, Michael. It's good to have you here. And then all the ASG members, you are most welcome. Some of the guests in our midst, lecturers and students from several universities are also present, and you are also welcome. I spoke to a few from Nigeria, and I think the support is so huge. I'm happy to have them. They are our neighbors anyway. We will engage you in open, thought-provoking, and constructive conversations on the theme, the role of actuaries in risk-based capital regimes and the development of data-driven African economies throughout the course of the next 3 days. The focus of today's workshop will be on core actuarial content, lecturer delivery, considerations, and practice contemplations for lecturers and students. So we will have several plenaries and talks on the following sub-themes during the next few hours. Understanding the minimum core actuarial content requirement, transition from study to practice, ethical and professional considerations for teaching actuarial content, institutionalizing collaborative research between academia and industry is very, very, very important for us in here. Beyond the formula, modern teaching approaches for the 21st century actuarial teacher, and selected research presentations. We would like to hear your thoughts and pose some challenging questions to you. This will make the actuarial science more enjoyable and beneficial to teach and learn than previously. Previously, it was something else. We anticipate that this conference will assist us in becoming more productive and effective in the following areas: championing risk-based capital regimes and assisting the development of our economies through the use of data. It's so much on our hearts, and this conference will have to bring some of them out. There will be opportunity for networking between programs. Make an effort to communicate with others and establish a positive rapport. Once again, it's great having you here, and you are warmly welcome. Have a wonderful deliberations. Gracias. We have the word akwaba. It means welcome. Wezolo is part of it, also welcome. And my hometown here in Accra, it says, Ohilenye Atu. You are welcome.
And if there's anybody from East Africa, say Habari Mabibi. I hope I got it right. Thank you. Thank you very much, ASG President, Mr. Neil Tego. I think that you've set the tone for a very engaging plenary session. But before we do that, we'll take short addresses, first from the IAA Africa Task Force Chairman, Luzanne Muldazi, and then the IAA President, Roseanne Harris. Round of applause. Thank you. Apologies, please. We'll ask Roseanne Harvest to first give her speech, and then the IA Task Force Chairman will do hers as well. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's certainly a great privilege for me as so many of the roles that I straddle represented amongst this audience today. I've been introduced. I'm Roseanne Harris. I'm the president of the IAA for 2022. But I am also a teacher. I teach actuarial science at Wits University in Johannesburg, and I've been doing that for about a quarter of a century. So I have a passion for education, so I have great admiration for the dedication that you show to education. And of course, I'm also an African-trained actuary. That all my studies I did in South Africa, and I completed my fellowship exams through the Institute and faculty. And then subsequently, in South Africa, we have been able to develop our fellowship curriculum. So it is certainly a great privilege and very exciting to be here in Africa at this event. And I know that Neil has gone through a tremendous amount of stress to put this on-again, off-again event together. So congratulations, first of all, to Neil and his team for getting this together. And I think that it really is timely that we do get together here and discuss how we can improve and enhance and develop and drive forward our approach to educating actuaries in Africa. I mean, it's interesting when you reflect on how the education of actuaries has changed over time. We've evolved from having a very technical, mathematical basis to now a syllabus that includes principles of economics and accounting, but also ethics and communication, and of course the challenge of teaching those. And then, of course, we are moving into an era where we need to be teaching data science and new techniques around that are continuously evolving. I mean, the sooner that you master these techniques, there's more developments, which is both challenging and exciting in terms of being able to work in this space. And I think we also need to bear in mind that we are preparing actuaries not just for traditional roles, but also for the wider fields that actuaries are working in. Of course, my field is healthcare, which was considered a wider field when I was studying, but is now quite established. But we even have cell phone providers who are employing actuaries, and we need to be preparing actuaries for these varied roles. Of course, I'm really proud to say as well that on our own continent here in Africa, we have developed the banking fellowship subject. So big tribute to Michael Tichereva, who was putting that together. And I think that just demonstrates that, that certainly from an education, particularly an actuarial education point of view, Africa is rising. And of course, we've got a lot to learn and to reflect upon over these last 2 years of the pandemic, and how we include that into those learnings, into our curriculum, let alone the climate risk that we're grappling with as well. And I'm pleased to say that, that there's a lot of material coming from our climate risk task force, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But I think there are exciting things as well as challenges that are happening on our continent. And it's important to recognize that, that actuaries who have been trained in Africa are being represented as a massive opportunity to contribute to uplifting our own continent, and that's important, that it's not just about global influence. We have here in Africa a demographic dividend, which means that we're really educating the future actuaries, the people who will make a difference to the societies that they live in and potentially have global impact as well. So it's really timely that we come here together, and I'm really looking forward to a stimulating and interesting day, and also to meeting many of you and chatting as well. So thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Roseanne. A round of applause for our president once again. We'll now receive the live stream of the African Task Force Chair. Roseanne, can you hear us?
Speak.
Yes.
Your reaction.
A little volume, yeah.
Perhaps unmute.
Are we okay? Still good morning here, Luzanne. Can you hear us? Just wave if you can hear us. He can't.
All right. Okay. A good message that I need to speak up a bit.
Yes, we can hear you. So.
To the 6th African Actuarial Congress. Unfortunately, that I couldn't be there, but made an effort to make sure that I can also participate and say one thing or two. I remember. 2016 in Cape Town. At that conference, there was a presentation that I did, and what I did this morning, I went back to that presentation just to see the thoughts that were shared at that Congress. And Now, is the volume fine? I'm having multiple people trying to reach me.
Hello. I think we'll cut and then skip to the next session. When we are through with him, we'll come back with his address. Understanding the minimum core actuarial content requirements is very important for our discussion. So we will invite Roseanne once again to also represent the IA Education Committee on this subject. Shall we welcome Roseanne?
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
I see any reaction. Should I continue
So
to speak?
I have some slides. Are you going
You
to?
can just indicate to me whether you can hear me.
We can. Hey, Lusani, can you hear me? No.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I think you can just continue with something else.
So I think just while they're bringing up my my slides, and I guess I'll just ask you to move them forward once you get them up. I thought that I would use this time just to give you a little bit of some history as to where the syllabus has come from and how it's been developed, and also the latest update, because we had an important vote at the council meeting last month in Brussels that approved the adjustment to the guidelines and introduced this core and elective principle. So I'm very keen to also share that with you and get your views on it. So that is the one. Thank you. Excellent. So if you can go to the next slide. Right, so I thought I would start with just a bit of a reflection about the role of the IAA in education and some principles around actuarial education. Oh, it was there and then it was gone. And then I'll talk a little bit about the syllabus development. Got it? That's it. Excellent. So I think you can go on to the next slide. So what I want to note here is, I'm sure you experience as actuarial educators, is that teaching actuarial science and training actuaries is so much more than just presenting a set of technical content and teaching technical content. That of course it's necessary but not sufficient for professional practice to master that technical competence. technical skills and demonstrate that competence. But of course, it also requires appropriate application. And I'm sure you also experience the challenge in teaching those thinking skills around judgment and how to apply judgment and determine the appropriate way to be solving actuarial problems. And then we have the challenges around ethics and professionalism, again, a topic on our agenda for today, in terms of how do you teach ethical practice? How do you teach professionalism? And of course, in the context of the building blocks of technical skills and competence. And then, of course, when we're talking about education, and particularly the work that is done in the IAA Education Committee, it's not just about the pre-qualification training, but also ensuring that there's a mechanism for people to be continuing learning throughout their careers. Some associations have those as ongoing requirements that need to be demonstrated, and there's also the pressure to then be providing the opportunities for that ongoing learning. Next slide, please. Stuck. So when we talk about education, and I thought just to contextualize where the syllabus sits, what I've shown here is kind of the different components. So the curriculum, which kind of is what we're going to teach, and the syllabus, which provides a lot more detail around those objectives associated with the curriculum. And then, of course, there's the how we deliver it, which is the tuition process, be it at university or through education providers. Also, how we assess, so now that the examination programs and whether the traditional examination programs are appropriate methods of assessment. And then, of course, what the ultimate output is in terms of a qualification or a designation and the requirements to maintain that. So specifically today, I'm talking about that what at the beginning. So a curriculum and syllabus, which is really defining the baseline of the content. And then, of course, there's a whole layer in terms of how we deliver it, which I think is also an important aspect of today's program. So focusing on the what, let's go to the next slide. This is from a document that was compiled by the Education Committee back in 2010. And it was a consideration really after the IAA had pretty much been reconstituted as to what is the role of an international body, an international actuarial association, in terms of education. And there was various considerations that were debated and discussed in terms of the levels of approach and support that can be offered to the member associations. So the important thing to recognize about the IAA is that it is an association of associations. Although there are sections in the IAA where individual actuaries belong to them, the IAA, as the Education Committee is part of, it is member associations that are represented on that entity. So the first level of sort of involvement of the IAA in actuarial education is around the sharing. So providing an opportunity for associations to come together and share their learnings, much as we're doing here today, sharing how the approaches that we have taken. The second level is to have some kind of common agreement on a syllabus, and perhaps even moving towards a mandatory minimum content. So to say, for example, that to be a member of the member association recognized by the IAA, that there's a minimum education content that is required. Then the third level is then if the IAA was to get involved in some kind of certification process. So in other words, instead of just providing a syllabus as a reference point, if there was to be some certification. Now, we haven't got even halfway through level 2, let alone to level 3. And I certainly think that in terms of the direction that the Education Committee has taken, it is a lot more supportive role than necessarily a provider role. So I don't envisage that the IAA is going to move up these levels as were debated back in 2010. I anticipate that the role of the IAA will be continuing to support member associations in the development of their curriculums and of their assessment and education processes through the sharing of information. The 2010 document even went further, if you go to the next slide, in terms of level 4 and 5. And to some extent, these have been touched on in the work of the Education Committee. So facilitating global access to actuarial programs is something that perhaps is facilitated through our Advice and Assistance Committee, which helps to, and some of you may have had engagement with the regional section of the committee, which Lusani chairs, that facilitating access to programs is perhaps an important role that the IAA can play. And then level 5 and level 6, as envisaged in this document, were around provision. And you'll note there that I've noted that that would be inconsistent with the subsidiarity principle. So subsidiarity really means that member associations are responsible for their jurisdiction, within their jurisdiction, and the IAA stands behind them. So the education and the syllabus that is defined by a member association has prime paramount's, and the IAA syllabus is intended to be then a reference point. But next slide, please. But of course, the focus here is around the education guidelines and the role that those education guidelines play in the global actuarial community. So I've stressed there, of course, that the guidelines recognize that education is a key strategic topic because it is essentially the baseline. If you like, it's what defines us as actuaries. Now, originally there was an IAA syllabus that was set out in the 1990 when the IAA was reconstituted back in 1998. And at that time, there was some deliberation around the concept of core versus specialist competencies. So to what extent should we be defining a core that is common to all areas of practice? And even back then in 1998, there was this burgeoning wider fields. Or to what extent should the syllabus be also addressing the needs and requirements of different areas of practice? But also recognizing that actuaries need to be adaptable, and that's actually part of our education as well. So in 2013, the education guidelines that were developed by that stage were essentially a list of topics to be covered. And the feeling was that in terms of assessing whether associations were meeting a standard, a list of topics was not adequate. And so there was a series of task forces which then evolved this into the syllabus as we have it now, and of course with this latest development. So next slide, please. So the Syllabus Review Task Force from 2014 to 2016 basically took that list of topics, and I think the important shift was taking it from knowledge to competencies. And I think that's, you know, as educators, I think you will appreciate that distinction, that it's not just being aware, but also knowing how to apply it and being a skilled practitioner. So the key output of that syllabus task force was to have this proposed minimum syllabus requirement. And the minimum would be, as in to be a member association of the IAA, you would have to have education based on that minimum standard. And it built on this work of the Educating Future Actuaries Task Force, which had identified some principles around defining learning areas and also using an adaptation of Bloom's taxonomy, which I will show you shortly, and I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with, which is a way of defining competencies. A lot of the Bloom's taxonomy relates to what I called, when I'm giving the students exam advice, the action words. You know, whether it's list or describe or discuss. So the action words really give a sense of the depth which is expected in terms of that competency. So through that process of this syllabus review task force, there was a lot of engagement, a lot of debate, which really reflected the diversity of approaches that were taking place around the world. And the trick really for an international association is to come up with something that is going to be acceptable across the world, but also still meaningful. One can't just go to the lowest common denominator and say, well, there we have it. It's got to still meet the principle of a reasonable standard. So if you go to the next slide, please. So what we had then was this 2017 syllabus, but we weren't quite sure as to whether that defined a minimum standard. There was still a lot of deliberation around whether the requirement to cover that defined then the minimum level of actuarial competency. And the way that the guidelines were framed was it spoke about touching on all of the 9 learning areas to an adequate level of depth. And it became very challenging for the Education Committee to actually assess that and be able to make a call as to whether different associations were meeting what could be considered to be a minimum standard. So inherent in the 2017 syllabus is this mathematical basis. So in order to tackle the syllabus, it's not, the mathematical requirements are not defined in the syllabus, but it is implicit in the syllabus, and you'll see in the education guideline, if you look at it on the website, that it is implicit that there is that mathematical basis, which I think for many associations forms part of their entry requirements. So the question is, do we have a minimum standard? And I think that's what was tackled then over the last year and a half, pretty much, by the Education Committee. You can go to the next slide. And some updates have been made to the education guidelines. Now, the key aspect of these updates is to introduce this concept of a core and elective approach. So what this is saying is that the 2017 syllabus, in terms of its scope and in terms of the amount of content, if I put it that way, the volume, is what an education curriculum should look like and encompass. But the specifics of the content of that, there should be more flexibility for member associations to structure that such that it meets the requirements of their jurisdiction. But there still needs to be a minimum, which is the core. So it gives the opportunity to say, well, you have to cover the core elements, and in terms of the electives, there can be some discretion as to what is included. So the guideline, you can see there, was 80% coverage of the core subject, so when you go down to the subtopic level, and some flexibility with regard to the electives. Now, what I find quite exciting about this is that it provides the opportunity for the electives to be broadened without necessarily burdening every association with an additional requirement to meet. So when it comes to, for example, introducing concepts around banking, climate risk, pandemic risk, we can start developing that content without it necessarily being something that everyone has to meet, and it can be incorporated into content through this core and elective approach. So let's go on to the next slide. So the flexibility in the approach, sorry, the last point on that previous slide I didn't touch on, which is that the Education Committee is currently working on an assessment framework for this. So I'm pleased to say that the update to the guideline was passed at the council meeting like not even a month ago. So the Education Committee is now working on the assessment framework, which is intended to be very collaborative and also with a foundation of self-assessment. So member associations being encouraged to conduct that assessment themselves and then to engage in a collaborative way with the Education Committee in terms of how that's being met. So if we look at then the flexibility that is built into the education guidelines, all of these aspects are things that member associations have the flexibility around. So the education basis, whether it's a university-based education or whether it's self-study with professional exams, just as two examples of an education basis. The source, so it doesn't necessarily, to be a full member association of the IAA, you don't actually need to have your own education program. You can actually have a system that is based on what we call a derived qualification on on another association's qualification platform. And then the qualification basis, whether it's through university grades or through examination scores, And of course, how that tuition part is done, the how part, also a lot of flexibility around those. And then importantly, and I think this is enhanced and improved with the core and elective approach, is that the scope for specialization. So recognizing that the needs and the demands on actuarial resources in different regions do differ, and so there needs to be that flexibility to accommodate the specialization in different areas. And then the mathematical basis versus the business orientation. Now this is an interesting one, because I think this has been an area of much debate in terms of the structure of the syllabus. And I think that's what gave rise really to that notion of there being an implicit mathematical requirement rather than necessarily explicit mathematical requirement to support the technical content. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've got the 9 subjects. They were previously called learning areas, so 9 subjects in the IAA syllabus. And under each of those, there are major topics and then minor topics, which are under the subheadings. So the change here would be that the 6 of those would be classified as core. I'll show you the draft at the moment of how that classification would work, where you need to touch on all the major subjects and all the major topics and 80% of the subtopics. And then with the elective subjects, it's a case of bringing them in as appropriate, but such that the coverage or the quantum is still at the equivalent level of content or volume of content of the IAA syllabus. So there's some flexibility in terms of packaging of the subjects as well. So just because these 9 subjects are defined in a certain way in the syllabus, it's not to say that a member association can't have their own subject definitions, which are drawing on parts, again, as may be appropriate given the history or given the demands of your particular jurisdiction. So next slide, please. So then, of course, how do we evaluate? And this is a big challenge that the Education Committee has been grappling with. So when you are working through an evaluation, one would look at the different subtopics and essentially score them in this way. So you can see that although this is very mathematically sound, that we can get a mathematical score, there's still some subjectivity here around the depth of coverage. And of course, that's where there needs to be sort of honest self-assessment and then engagement with the Education Committee. And that process, I think, is not just a process of assessment in terms of meeting membership criteria, but also an opportunity to provide support in terms of development of syllabus content in different regions. So you'll note there at the bottom as a guide to the required depth. So there was some debate when we had the council meeting around whether the 4,000 to 6,000 hours of study is an appropriate metric. But essentially the principle here is that we're trying to capture that it's equivalent to a 3-year university program, that it's not something that you can cover in a week-long course and say, well, you've touched on all of those subtopics, so there you are, you're done. So next slide, please. So this is the Bloom's taxonomy that you'll see. It's presented just like this, actually, in the guidelines. And I think this is the attempt to shift from just competence, from just knowledge to competencies. So what you see then is the various objectives set down on the yellow bars. So factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and then levels of depth, and then the way in which it's assessed. And you can see again those verbs coming into to the way in which it's assessed. And I know in the way that we assess our examinations in South Africa is that we look at the relative weighting of different aspects of assessment in terms of weighting the weight of the difficulty of an exam and the adequacy of an examination in terms of meeting these requirements. So I think it's an important transition in terms of moving from knowledge to competencies, and certainly something that I'd like to highlight with you. So let's just have a look then at those sort of different cognitive levels, if we go to the next slide. So the different types of knowledge that are captured there. So factual knowledge, which is largely what we would call bookwork perhaps. Conceptual knowledge, which is now taking that and starting to think about how aspects of that knowledge relates one to the other. And then procedural knowledge, which is now more about application in terms of how you actually do something. How do you do a reserve calculation? How do you do a pricing exercise? And then importantly, moving to metacognitive knowledge, which is then the professionalism and ethics aspect of it, which is perhaps not just a part of the pre-qualification curriculum, but also part of the post-qualification curriculum as well. So let me give you a little bit of a view of the syllabus. Those of you who are familiar with it will be familiar with these topics, so I'm not going to go through each of them in the interest of time. But you can see, of course, the subject areas here. So we've got the first 5, statistics, economics, finance, financial systems, and assets. And then on the next slide, I've got the next 4. If you go to the next slide. So data and systems, actuarial models, actuarial risk management, and then the personal and actuarial professional practice. So you can see, of course, that the weight of those different levels of knowledge under each of those subjects is likely to be slightly different. So for example, that last one has a lot more of that sort of more advanced metacognitive knowledge. So the current thinking around the core and elective split, yeah, you can go to that slide, thank you, is shown here. So this is not yet cast in stone, but just to give you a sense of it, that if we take those 9 subjects, that they would be split into the core and elective looking something like this. You can see already there's been some debate about that finance topic as to, and suggesting that it should be split up in splitting it between core and elective. And I've also asterisked the financial systems because there were certainly a significant number of members of the Education Committee who felt that that belonged under the core section of the syllabus. So this just gives you a sense of how that would be structured and where the flexibility would be. So essentially the elective items, there would be a bit more flexibility in terms of structuring the curriculum in a particular region. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the review process, that assessment process, it's important that although it has implications in terms of membership status with the IAA, that it is also conducted on a collaborative basis to ensure that there's those opportunities for growth and for further development. And it's also good feedback to the Education Committee in terms of how the syllabus is being used and employed. And I think very excitingly now, with a core and elective approach, there's an opportunity for us to think about how we incorporate new learning areas into that syllabus. Next slide, please. So of course, there's many new areas of development. Michael, I hope you noticed the big banking on my slide here. But lots of areas where we need to be developing content and need to be thinking about the kind of skills that we need to be introducing in our syllabus for actuaries to make sure that they are equipped to work in these areas. And of course, the big one at the bottom there is data analytics. And I'm really hopeful that this approach to the syllabus will mean that there's greater opportunities for member associations to be sharing what they have done in these various areas. And of course, this is not by any stretch exhaustive. And then incorporating that into something that is accessible more broadly and globally in terms of developing curriculums. So, I think it's my last slide. So just a few points for discussion, and certainly interested in your thoughts around these. So of course the balance of technical and application topics, I'm sure it's something that you that you grapple with yourselves in terms of actuarial education and even when setting examinations and assessments? And how do we teach concepts like ethics and professionalism? And then what about on-the-job learning? How do we incorporate that into a qualification process, that there shouldn't all be theoretical and off-site in educational institutions, but there should be an element of on-the-job learning? How do we factor that in? And then importantly is encouraging research for the development of knowledge. I'm on the panel this afternoon to discuss some collaborative approaches to research, but research is really important in terms of developing knowledge, certainly as the past 2.5 years have shown us. And then, of course, for us at the IAA, the ongoing challenge of balancing having a meaningful global standard, and perhaps I should have had a little meaningful on that slide, with having something that is also relevant at local level, so at the level of the members' associations. So we certainly do need to hear everyone's voices, and for me in particular, very keen to hear about the particular challenges and inputs and concerns from the community of educators here in Africa. So thank you very much for the opportunity to make this presentation. Chair, I'm not sure if I should take questions now or later. Any questions? I think we are having a panel later as well if there's questions you want to think about, but if there's anything I can address now quickly. Yep.
Thank you for talking about continuing education and collaboration and ethics and professionalism. And for more of that, Friday at 11:20 there'll be a presentation about that. But in terms of the base syllabus that you're discussing, I think this is really for associations that qualify as IA members. Hello? How broad is that in terms of, general insurance versus non-general, general versus non-general, or non-life and life, as some of you may refer to the dichotomy? Is it broad enough that it would cover disciplines in like health, where you live, to cover all those topics? I know there's specializations above that, but how general is that, but it's still encompassing base concepts?
Thank you. Thanks. That's a really important point, and certainly, when I talk about areas of practice, different areas of practice, it's trying to identify those competencies which are common to all areas of practice, and that's kind of what sits in the core. And then those competencies that are more specifically required for certain areas of practice, as you say, like you have your life, your general insurance, healthcare. We've had a debate about whether health sits under life or non-life as well. Then those competencies should be sitting then more in the elective. So I feel that the intention is that the core and elective structure is better able to accommodate that. Because certainly from the perspective of the Casualty Actuarial Society, having a syllabus that has life-heavy content, there's concepts that there needs to be an awareness of. So again, it's the depth. As opposed to, then going all the way down that factual knowledge. So hopefully the structure is flexible enough that it accommodates, also not just whether something is in or out, but the depth to which, it's an awareness versus that depth of knowledge that's required. Does that help? Great. Any other? Yep, I can do that.
Thank you very much for the good presentation. In fact, you have turned a different teacher from the way you approach your presentation. my worry is that when you are talking about the core courses, you only mention the actuarial models. But I'm expecting you to say something about demography, but it's totally lacking. So I don't know whether there is somewhere else where that will be accommodated. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. The content around demography. I mean, there is, when you look at some of the contingencies elements of the syllabus, there is demography implicit in that, but there is not explicit coverage of demography in the syllabus. And I think it highlights, even when you look at, you have a debate with economists around the level of economics that is included in the syllabus. And so it is an ongoing debate as to whether an actuary needs to have an understanding of concepts that they can engage in a multidisciplinary team with experts who in that field, as opposed to having that depth of knowledge themselves. Because by the same token, we need to make sure that the syllabus is adequate, but not too onerous that no one can ever actually use it. So it is a case of striking that balance. And I think that particularly when it comes to the work that's been done around, for example, social security systems, when I look at the requirements of our ISAP, for example, around social security systems, there is demography in there that perhaps is not adequately covered in the syllabus. So I would agree with you that that is certainly an area where there can be further development. Thank you. Good. Excellent. Then I'll hand over.
Oh, another round of applause for Roseanne. Thank you very much. And I hope we are all taking notes. Yes. On the next presentation, we have Yvonne Palm from CAS to give us on the ethical and professional consideration for teaching actuarial content. Shall we welcome her, please?
Thank you very much, Neil. So as they're bringing up my slides, I will just say we've actually changed the topic a little bit. So the topic is actually professionalism, bridging the gap between the lecture hall and the office. So I'm going to try and attempt to give you some tips on how to bridge the gap or train your students to be able to be more equipped to handle the office. Yeah, thank you very much for the slides. And just as they bring them, putting them up, just a bit of background on myself. My name is Yvonne Palm. I live in Nigeria. I work for a reinsurance company there. I'm also on the board of the Casualty Actuarial Society. I'm an FCAS and also an FIA. So I'm very happy to be here and excited for what we're going to be discussing. So next slide, please. So what will we discuss today? First, I'm just going to give a little bit of general information about actuarial practice in general, and also just touch on both general insurance, because I think people are very familiar with life, it seems. I'm going to touch on general insurance a little bit and also talk about the Casualty Actuarial Society a little bit as well. And then at the end, I'm going to give you 5 pointers on what you can share with your students to help them be more prepared for working as a professional. So the next slide, please. So areas of work for actuaries. I think the insurance industry is something that everybody is familiar with. We have life and annuities, and I've highlighted property and casualty, which most people might also know as general insurance or non-life. And like I said, that's what the CAS focuses on, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. We've got the employee benefit industry or pensions, financial service industry. I think we heard about banking, investments, risk management, which does span everything. We also have actuaries that work in mergers and acquisitions. We have actuaries that work in government for social security, also regulators. I think in a few African countries, including Ghana, we've had some very good examples of actuaries working in the regulator and making a lot of difference in the industry. So the next slide. So the Casualty Actuarial Society, let me just introduce you to us a little bit. So we are the world's only actuarial society that's based on property and casualty risk exclusively, or general insurance exclusively. So we have all the others. Some are based on life, some not, but and some do lots of other things, but we do general insurance or property casualty only. And we have a more than 100-year track record in training property and casualty actuaries. And I believe we do so very well. We have more than 9,000 members worldwide, and by members I'm referring to fellows and associates. And of those 9,000 members, 5% of them are outside of North America. And also 12% of our candidate exams are outside of North America right now, which shows that there is a growing interest in the casualty and property field outside of North America. And I don't know if I mentioned before, we are based in North America, so that's where most of our actuaries are. So the CAS is a vibrant and growing society, and we do have very deep and extensive knowledge in the property and casualty fields. And we are a very strong resource in those areas. I'm going to touch on some of the different areas we offer and some of the seminars we offer as well, which will give you a bit more of a flavor of what we do. But one thing that's also very particular about the CAS is we have lots of people that volunteer. A large proportion of our membership actually volunteer for the society, and we are actually more member-led than anything else. And I myself, actually, I think I started volunteering for the CAS from my very first job. I volunteered for the Candidate Liaison Committee and have been a volunteer ever since. So it's something that the CAS really does pride itself on. Next slide, please. So this is just an indication of where our members tend to work. About half of them work in P&C insurers, which is expected. We've got maybe another eighth or so that are consultants, and in service organizations, we have people in reinsurance, like myself. And then we also have another section of retired actuaries who actually are very much involved in the CAS as well. And of course, we have people that work in brokers and agents, academia, and government, etc. Next slide, please. So what does a property and casualty actuary do? So we work in everything. I know people like to say life and non-life. So yeah, I also describe it as everything. I work in every type of insurance other than life insurance, right? So whether it's aviation or the insurance of power corporations or power production or oil and gas. I've worked in places where we do kidnap and ransom insurance. I've worked in a company where we insured athletes. So we did actually insure, the legs of soccer players and things like that. It is a real thing. Many sports contracts, lots of different things. So just think about anything that you can insure. Property and casualty is that we deal with all of that. Of course, there's the normal motor insurance, home insurance, even fine art insurance, everything. And that's what I really, really like about my job. Like I get to touch on all different types of insurance. But within those different types of insurance, there are also subsections, and I am also just going to go through this briefly. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but for the benefit of the students and some of the academics in the room, I'm going to go through the individual ones. So we do have rate making and pricing, and that's where actuaries in general just try to help create models for companies in order to help them price the insurance products. or to come up for the rates that they should use to price the insurance products. We also have reserving. I started my career in reserving, and that's basically where we help insurance companies or companies in general put up money to cover their future insurance claims. We have predictive modeling as well. I personally think all actuaries do predictive modeling, but predictive modeling in itself has come up as a newish field where people use a lot more statistics in order to drive their projections. And then we have capital adequacy or capital modeling, where actuaries are generally helping companies to come up with how much money they should hold to back the risks that are within their financials. So it's just an indication of a company that's very strong and can handle shocks that are unexpected. And then we have reinsurance. Obviously, reinsurers are insurers of insurers. So as reinsurers, we help to provide capital or provide resources to other insurance companies to be able to help them also withstand major shocks. And then enterprise risk management, where we're helping companies look at the risks throughout the organization and in a holistic view. So next slide, please. So I mentioned all of these traditional actuarial fields, but there are also non-traditional actuarial roles that are becoming much, much popular. So actuaries aren't just limited to insurance because our deep analytical skills, our advanced analytical skills, and our thinking are being sought out in many other industries. I think a lot of people probably heard all the funfair on LinkedIn when Tesla was looking for a revolutionary actuary. Uber hires actuaries. Google hires actuaries, Amazon hires actuaries. I recently went to a conference in Disney, and I heard how Disney looks for people with skills like actuaries to help predict where crowds are going to be and where they should send their really popular characters to draw away crowds, like Mickey Mouse. You know, the crowd's over there, where should we send Mickey Mouse? So, you know, that's something an actuary can do. So there are actually many, many places that actuaries can work. We heard our IAA president talk about how mobile phone companies are also looking for actuaries as well. So, you know, an actuary can work in all of these places. And actually, the CAS, we do offer many, many seminars through the year that cover all different types of actuarial fields. I mentioned reserving, pricing, predictive analytics. We actually have separate seminars for all of that. And more, we also incorporating a lot of the non-traditional roles like telematics and things like that. Next slide. The other thing that I really enjoy about my job as an actuary is that many trends do affect what we do. So I have to keep up to breast on what is going on all the time. So things like big data and the Internet of Things, that is definitely affecting the actuarial field. Much more data to use. If you're a company that can harness that data well, you'll be able to get a competitive advantage over others and you know, maybe be more efficient in your practices. Climate change was something that was also mentioned before. That's something that actually is expected to impact Africa more than other countries. So, you know, it's something that we as actuaries have to keep abreast on. And then other things, I mean, there's plenty up there, but other things also, you know, continual technical advancements. How is the use of drones in insurance impacting how we pay claims? We have to think about all of that. So, you know, that's something that I really love myself as an actuary, that you have to think about all of these things in what you're doing and try and see how they'll impact what happens in the future. So next slide, please. So as an actuary, our skill set does require balance. So I think the technical competence is handled very well. I mean, at university, there's a lot of statistical rigor, lots of things that people learn, and then also within the exams, because they're so rigorous as well, people tend to hone their technical skills. But the other three, I think, are very important. The ability to communicate is something that is extremely important as an actuary. When I'm talking to the CEOs and CFOs, and, you know, I did some wonderful, complicated analysis, and I want to talk about it in the complexity that I love and they'll just look at me with blank faces, and that just doesn't work. You have to learn how to break things down and get people on board, because otherwise you do lose credibility. So the ability to communicate is something that's extremely important. So please get your students to be honing in on their communication skills. It's not just about being technically competent. And then business acumen and professional standards are also something that are very important to the actuarial field. I think the actuarial field in general stands out because of this. Actuaries do have to adhere to professional standards compared to other professions or other jobs, and that is actually what draws people to us, or what helps people to gain that confidence that when they're hiring an actuary, they're getting somebody that will deliver the right quality and deliver with professional and ethical standards. So this is something that's actually really important. And again, I'm not sure it gets covered in university. I think it's something that people tend to learn later on in life, but I think it's something that you could start early on. So if we just go to the next slide, so I'm gonna now move on to talk about my 5 tips that I'm going to give you to help your students better prepare themselves for the office. So the first is codes of conduct. So I mentioned how professionalism is something that makes actuaries stand out. And that's because we have so many, it's drilled in by all of the actuarial bodies that we have to remain professional, and there are codes of conduct that we have to adhere to. So I would just recommend that you start to introduce your students to these codes of conduct early. And they're all available online. They cover principles such as ethical behavior, integrity, competence and care, impartiality, accountability, many other things. Just reinforcing to actuaries, you should be doing what's right, and you should be doing a job that you can do, right? So I've put a few examples of codes on the slides. The CAS has its code of professional conduct. We also have a code of professional ethics for candidates to try to get them already started in terms of the exams. The IAA has principles of professionalism. The IFOA has the actuaries code. And then there are many, many others that you can look up. So do look them up and do start introducing your students to those codes. The second, I would say, is to keep an open mind. So no two actuaries, if you gave them the same information, would produce the same projection, right? They'd all come up with different results, and maybe even widely different results. Yet, actuarial judgment is what companies pay us so much money for, right? When we give these answers, people do place a high degree of reliance on what we're saying. So it's actually very important as an actuary that you do keep an open mind, and you ensure that when you're making projections, you get feedback from other people, you get critique from other people, you get challenged by other people, and so that you can hone in on your skills, improve your actuarial judgment, and incorporate all that additional knowledge in order to get your results to be more reasonable, right? No actuarial result is correct, but it can be reasonable or not, right? So that's something that's very, very important as an actuary. I do recall, like, my first job, before we sent anything out, 4 pairs of eyes had to look at it, right? So you're the analyst that did your analysis. Someone else comes to check that your formulas were correct, because people make mistakes. Another person, probably who was your manager, will come and see, just check to see if what you're doing was reasonable, ask you questions, challenge you, and then there'll be a fourth person who would be what we call the peer reviewer, who wasn't involved at all and would come and just look to see if, I've read what these people have said, I've looked at the assumptions, is it reasonable? Okay, so that's something as an actuary you have to get used to doing, people challenging you. All actuaries are smart. Most smart people don't like being challenged, but you need to be open to the fact that that challenge will actually help you become a better actuary. So having that open mind is something that you should be encouraging your students with. Try and get them to be more involved with each other, challenging each other, try and get them to work with different people, try and get them to incorporate different theories or different points of view into what they're doing. And I'd also just like to say, like, for myself as an actuary, it isn't just feedback from other actuaries that's important. Also feedback from the actual business is really important. I like to work a lot with underwriters to hear what they have to say. I mean, usually it is opposite to what you're doing. Like, they want the numbers to be lower, you want the numbers to be higher. But you do want to listen to what they have to say, because they get to see what's on the ground. They're much closer to the policies, and they can actually give you some good feedback. Just absorb all the information, process it, and feed it in through your numbers. So that's something that I think you can start developing with your students right now, where they are right now. Get them to start working together, get them to start doing peer reviews, get them to start challenging each other. It is difficult to get that feedback sometimes, but it is a very important step. The next slide, please. So the third tip I have for you is to get your students to start exploring formal resources. So one resource that I wanted to talk about is the CAS Student Central. It's a website, casstudentcentral.org, that's available for free to students. It gives lots of different resources. You can go to the next slide. This is what it looks like. And if you go to the next slide again, so you get access to lots of resources. It's completely free, as I said. You get access to an online community of other students that can give you tips, free practice exams. There's a free modeling software on there. You get access to webinars, internships and scholarships. That might be a little bit difficult at the moment based in Africa. However, the more people we have from here that are applying, the more demand there will be, and maybe the more that we'll be able to work with employers on the ground here as well to offer internships to the students. So yeah, there's many opportunities on the CAS Students Central for students, so I do encourage you to get your students to log on to that and see what's happening there. Next slide, please. We also have a summer program that runs from, I think, July to August, but applications, I think, are due early March. Through the CAS Student Central that provides a more rigorous training program for the students during that time. Last year, we had 7 students from Africa that applied, and 4 that participated, and 4 completed it successfully. And I'm very pleased to say that participation from Africa is growing. This year, we've had 90 CAS Student Central applicants from Africa, from all these different countries, all of Africa, and I myself am extremely excited for that. And I'd encourage I don't know if it's changed as much, but from what I see, it hasn't changed much. But I know for myself, when I was in university, I thought your only option was to be a life actuary. I didn't know about casualty actuaries. I happened to become one just because of my employer made me one. But I'm actually really happy that that happened. But I'd like to encourage you to expose your students to other types of actuarial work, and let them know that there are other options early on as well. And maybe your university also trying to see what he can do with a program with the university to start sponsoring the top students to start doing exams. So something that you can discuss with your local actuarial practice, your actuarial organizations, and also with employers to see if you can start setting that up. But really, exams, especially early in your career, are what really help you to get promoted. That's just the fact of life in the actuarial practice. And also, I know in the US at least, many companies won't even hire you if you don't have an exam or two before you graduate. So, it could just be a matter of time before that hits Africa. But I would say, for me, if I get 500 applications for an entry-level role, and there's one person in there who's done 1 or 2 actuarial exams, that person is they will definitely be on my short list compared to everyone else. So, I would highly encourage you to get your students to start taking exams if they have the means. If they don't, try and look for scholarship opportunities for them to try and get those exam fees lower. I also know that some actuarial organizations are trying, even out of pocket, to help students. I know there's an example from the Actuarial Society of Zimbabwe where the actuaries have pulled together money to try and pay for exams for some of their students. So this is something that we can all do to help. I'll give you one more resource. If you go to the next slide, I have scoured the CAS website to see what scholarships could be applicable to African students. If you can just go to the next slide, please. So we do have the CAS Trust Scholarship Program. Yep. So if you go to casact.org/Trust Scholarship, there's a scholarship program that is open to students all over the world. The application deadline is January, so for this year it's done. But you can start looking into it for next year because there are quite a few requirements for you to meet to be able to apply. So, that's something you can look at, something you can encourage your students to apply to. It is very competitive, but, you can give it a shot and see what happens. And again, if they get more applicants from Africa, they'll start noticing, and maybe we can do more. So those are all the points that I have. I would just stop and see if there are any questions or points for discussion. Peter.
Yeah, we're talking about the Student Central. Could you give us that website address again?
Yes, it is casstudentcentral.org. Yes, CASstudentcentral.org.
And also, you were saying about having to, when you go into an employer, having to have exams experience. When I first started, many, many years ago, most of that 100 years of CS in business I've been around, but they weren't looking for students with exams
Yep.
at all.
Yep.
Now I see when there's new hires, they're looking for people with exams and also students with maybe internships in their, in the summers or during their senior year or in the gap between the junior and senior year. And one of the other resources, again, I'm a great supporter of education, teachers, professors, educators, and you all do a great job. But to have, give obviously sort of the resource to where to get the exams, who to contact about registering for them, maybe develop some relationship, and maybe this is incumbent on the companies, with the universities about internships as well. So companies can come to the educators to say, okay, we have this program, we need people this summer, but because when the companies are hiring, they look a lot, yes, to exams, but also the students at an internship. So that's a good collaboration, I think, between the industry, the actuarial associations, and educators. So.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Peter. And just to add to that point, or buttress it a bit more, I guess, when I started, most companies required one exam. Some were okay. But I remember when I went for my first interview, there were people there who had 4 exams, which it's incredible. And exams are getting more and more accessible in terms of, they're being held more frequent. So you find that more people have exams when they graduate. So it really, it does give you a competitive edge. So if you can, do it. And the people in the room who have access to the resources, if you can help organize things like that for the students in your locality, please do it. I think we have a question over there.
My name is Michael. So thanks for a great presentation. These last discussions, we're talking more about having exams. So my question is, so this last discussion, we are talking about a student having more exams, which I think is quite important. Because even us as the actuarial side of South Africa, we're trying to see universities accrediting their courses so that students can get those exams. But my question is on, there is a lot more behind an actuary having technical skills. The human skills and soft skills that are required. And when we are in practice, what we see is that sometimes you fail on your professional obligations because you do not have those other skills. Well, communication being one of them, because it's part of the track of training an actuary. My question to you is, to what extent then does CARS put emphasis on developing soft skills, human skills early in a student's career? Even at university level, because we've got lecturers here, and all of them, what they want to teach is equation of value. But for me, equation of value is incomplete without those human soft skills when I want to hire you. So I might even hire you without a subject because you've got a good attitude in these other attributes, and then I train you, help you to get your exams. So that's my question to you. Sorry, I hope it's easy to address.
Okay, thank you for that question. Again, 100%. Being an actuary is not just about being smart and having technical skills. Communication, 100%, is definitely needed, as well as those additional professional and ethical skills. Now, the problem is communication is not as easy to test, right? And it's also something that you build over time. So I do know at least the IFOA, I know it has a communications paper, and it's one that gets failed the most. But again, it's not something that's very easy to test. And at least in it's something you build up over time. So I would encourage, first of all, at the university level, do encourage students to hone in on those skills. So have them do presentations to the class, have them make speeches and things like that to start building up on those skills. But then also, it's something that you build up on as you're doing your work. So the CAS does, we don't test communications. It is something we have been thinking about. But again, because it's difficult, we don't necessarily test it. But there are different, I think there are many organizations that might offer communication skills training better than actuarial organizations. So I think, at least from our perspective, we emphasize that you need to improve those skills quite heavily, but we don't necessarily provide that training ourselves because we think other people might train you better. But it is emphasized, and in things like, I think, the professionalism course, we do try to get people to at least talk and get those skills exercised a bit. But communication is something that is built on over time, and I also personally don't think it's something that you can examine that easily. But I do agree with the approach of emphasizing it, encouraging it, and getting people to practice it. And I also find that communicating business information is also a little bit different from just general communication, and that's something that also you have to build up over time. But I think it's just for actuaries themselves to realize as they're learning that you need to be developing this skill as you're moving on. Yeah. I have a question over here.
In the morning or in the afternoon? Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Orwell. I'm a lecturer from University of Lagos. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe the discussion is about bridging. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the discussion is about bridging the gap between the office and the classroom. And I believe you mentioned something about once in a while, lecturers can invite professionals from the field to come and take a class. So I have a question. How about we also do the reverse? Is there nothing in place of companies like your company, a reinsurance company, that has a lot of experience with working in other insurance companies, bringing over a lecturer or an educator in the field and kind of updating the knowledge they have, like with actual practice and, real life case studies. Because if you check it, if you educate a student, it's good. That's a student. If you educate an educator, there's like students, You're actually opening a pathway for him to have the right knowledge to broaden his horizon and, have a more impactful impact, if that's even a word, So I think because a lot of people have this argument that the curriculum sometimes doesn't really capture, advancements. Like you mentioned a lot of things, climate change, you said something about kidnapping insurance, social media, all those things are, things that needs to be inculcated so that people will not just, there won't be that, should I say, disconnect between traditional practice and more recent practice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if I got you correctly, I think your question is, do companies provide like internship-like experiences to educators? Okay. So that's a very good question, It's not actually something I've thought about. I don't know if it's something that anyone else has thought about, but it's actually a very good point. But I would mention that's why we're here right now, right? So, I think things like this forum are exceptionally good, and I would encourage, the organizers, I don't know who's doing this next, but, to continue with this teachers conference and ensure that we're doing things like that for teachers. With respect to companies, companies are for-profit organizations, right? Most of it. So this would be coming out from their corporate social responsibility efforts. So we'd have to take that company by company. But from my perspective, this is the first time someone's actually said something like that, and it's actually opening my mind to this possibility. You're completely right. Educating an educator is, you're going to now educate thousands of students. So, I hope that this conference for the educators in the room will actually help bridge that gap a bit. But, you make a very good point, and, all the actuaries, professionals, those who have access to the money in companies, take note of this point, because I think it's a very good one. Thank you. Or am I done? Okay. There's one behind there. Yes.
We have to keep to our time.
It's not long. Sorry, I needed 5 minutes, but I'm going to do it in 30 seconds. It's not a question. Now, in line with this, I hope by show of hands in this room, especially people who are lecturing or teaching. Only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I thought about, as a continuation of this, establishing what we call Africa Actuarial Educators Network. So, actuarial side of South Africa has already said, let's do this. So by show of hands here, who is interested? So that's going to come. It's called Africa Actuarial Educators Network. That will then progress this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm happy about this because that was one of the objectives of this particular conference. We wanted to bring actuarial educators together on one platform and start educating them on what the real deal is, what the real content is. And that is the reason why we put together this. And it's the first time we are doing this. We are hoping that it will continue. Whoever takes up from our end will continue this. So I think the Actuarial Educators Network thing will start right away. We have the data. We'll put everyone on the same platform, starting from WhatsApp, and email communications will go right after this meeting. So thank you for joining. We hope that we'll get those of your colleagues who couldn't join us, you will be able to add their numbers as well, so that we can have a larger forum to discuss some of these things that are relevant to our practice. Thank you.
Sorry, it's really quick. Yeah, so thank you for that. I think that's excellent. I'm glad this is happening. I wanted to make one more point, actually, in relation to this education. So COVID has actually helped us in one way, right? It's brought people closer together. We have access to webinars, like you don't have to necessarily travel for things like this. So you actually have access to a lot of webinars, seminars, and as an educator, you're not precluded from joining some of these sessions to learn. You know, if you know, follow some of these organizations online, on LinkedIn, wherever, get on their newsletters, and you can see what sort of sessions come up, and then, you know, join them. And you can definitely also learn from that. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
A round of applause for Yvonne. I wanted to say something. Should I say it? When I was in school, I've stopped going to school anyway. I learn on my own now. When you go to the exam room and you have learned some part of the syllabus and the other side comes up, what do? You try to dovetail what you have learned into what the lecturer wants. At least you don't fail. You get something home. I think that's what Yvonne has done. He intelligently told us, oh, I went a little sly from what was given to me. But we'll clap for her. She's done well. And I think we've all benefited from it. I want us to keep to the topics that we have given for a reason. For a reason. The African Task Force chair was supposed to speak before all the presenters. And we have in there what Michael was talking about. I'm a vice chair to that committee, and we belong to the Advice and Assistance Committee of the IA. So we're trying to start something like this for the educators. So the next country which is going to host that's the 7th African Congress, I think will continue with such forum. And CAS has spoken. The other organizations will follow. And I want us to do it nicely so that the educators will take home something that we have planned for this forum. I think that we will break. We want to keep to our time. We will break, have our lunch, and then when we come back, we have a lot more for all of you. Thank you, and we'll meet you again after break.